Hey everyone, today we're going to take a look at the Marvel Legends Controller Build-A-Figure Wave Iron Man 6-inch action figure. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, or even hit that super thanks button. I appreciate all engagement. And now let's have a look at the box. At the top of the box, we have the Iron Man logo of his helmet. And to the bottom, we have some product information. Down to the side, very nice artwork, reminds me of Alex Ross's style, with all the vivid colors and how the light kind of interacts with the artwork in the scene. On the back of the box, there's a much larger version of that artwork. This artwork looks really cool to me, and Iron Man is walking out of flames. Iron Man's character descriptions on the right side of the back, and we also have the other characters in the wave, followed by more product information at the bottom. And finally, onto that last side of the box is that same artwork. So let's go ahead and get this figure open. Out of the box, the Iron Man action figure is on the plastic tray, and he comes with 2 swappable fists, 2 blast effects, as well as 2 smoke effects. The blast effects are cast in a transparent yellow plastic, and they let the light through quite nicely. The smoke effects are also semi-transparent and are cast in a white plastic. These effect parts are exactly the same as those that came with the 20 years Iron Man and also the Riri Williams action figure. So you do have the option of using the blast effects and smoke effects on whichever way on the figure that you want, whether on his arms or on his feet. You also do have the option of using them together, whether having the smoke effect attached to the blast effect at exactly the same part on his open palm, or have the smoke effect also hanging out from his wrist and then combining with the blast effect somewhere in the middle. And we have a look at his clenched fists. They are cast in a bright red metallic looking plastic. On the insides of his palms, you can see he's got his repulsor sculpted over there. There's also nice sculpting for the lines in the panels of his armor, and also a couple of bumps for where his knuckles are. These fists are articulated inwards as well as outwards. And of course, those fists work great with the figure as well. This Iron Man figure is a completely brilliant brand new sculpt, so let's go ahead and zoom into his details. His head sculpt is quite sleek, assembled from a golden yellow plastic for the front face piece, and that's attached to the bright metallic red plastic that's used for the rest of his head. I like the angular sculpt on the cheekbones of his face plate. I think it makes the figure look more intimidating. I do think his eyes are just slightly far apart. I also have to mention that the eyes are a separate piece of black plastic that's inserted behind the faceplate, while there's black paint for his mouthpiece, as well as some vents on the side of his faceplate. Couple of lines for the segmenting in the armor at the top of the head, and also that kind of separate earpiece that's also sculpted on. His neck is also the same red metallic plastic with the same line detail that goes all the way around his neck, so it looks believably like articulated armor. Moving on to his torso, there's also a lot of sculpted detail, from the more angular collar piece at the top down to more great line work for the tech detail on his armor. There's white paint for his arc reactor, however the white paints on his chest plate do look a little flat. I do think that these should have at least had a little bit of blue added to them to make them look like they glow, kind of in a similar way that the box art was drawn. His lower torso is also the same bright red metallic plastic with even more line work to show his angular abdominal sculpt, and also around his crotch piece. The line work is great and it's all over his torso and leads on to the side of his torso armor, where you also see white paint for his waist attachment. However, I will say that despite the great sculpt on his torso in general, it still just looks like one solid piece of bright red plastic, looking slightly cheap because the contrast doesn't stand out from all those nicely sculpted lines. We go on to his arms. His shoulder pad is a separate golden yellow piece of plastic that's attached to the rest of his arm, which is the same bright red metallic plastic. There's gold paint for that armor plate on the outside of his bicep, and his bicep connects to a mid-elbow piece, which is a golden yellow plastic. Once again, this elbow piece is a bit disappointing because the yellow doesn't really blend well with the rest of the red on the bicep piece. We've seen Hasbro paint mid-elbow joints quite effectively, so this elbow piece just really leaves a little bit to be desired. His inner forearm piece is a golden yellow plastic, and that's inserted into a bright red metallic plastic for his gauntlet that connects to his glove as well. I like the detail of the circles that are sculpted on either side of the gauntlet. However, once again, these are also painted just white, and the white paint looks quite flat and doesn't really achieve that glowing effect. On the back of his torso, without any white paint to break it up, it really just looks like one piece of red plastic, which is quite boring to look at, despite some nice sculpting work and the more angular design of his back piece. We move on to his legs. His upper leg is the bright red plastic with a golden yellow plastic armor attached onto the thigh. I like how his legs look chunkier and generally the more chunky aesthetic of the entire armor, because this makes Iron Man believably a guy that's putting on a really powerful and protective armor. There's some more line work on his thighs as well. His lower leg also has that same treatment as his forearms. We see the inner piece as a golden yellow plastic that's inserted into his bright red metallic looking boots. His boots also have those white circles sculpted on the side, and that leads to some more good sculpting work for all the segments on his boots. Impressively, the bottom of his feet are also sculpted, so you can see a couple of thrusters over there. So you can see overall that he's got great sculpting work. I like the size and the chunkiness of this figure. However, I do think that it needs more paint work in order to bring out the contrast and the lines in that really nicely sculpted armor, and also more intricate paint detail in order to bring out those glow effects on those circles. And just to illustrate my point, I really do like how bulky and chunky he is. It's quite a different design compared to other Iron Man. However, with the amount of sculpting detail on his armor, he still ends up looking quite lackluster compared to the rest, despite sharing more or less the same metallic color palette and having more detail. For articulation, I like how his neck is constructed. It's got a ball hinge at the top of the neck that goes down into another ball joint at the bottom of the neck. So that means you can spin his head 360. When you use both joints together, it gives him quite impressive sideways tilting. The range is also pretty great, with him looking downwards as well as upwards, and that's really useful for flight poses. He's got a swivel hinge at the shoulders so that spins all the way around, and that shoulder pad is constructed so that it can slide over his shoulders when you articulate his arm outwards. However, that makes the shoulder pad look kind of strange, but I'm okay with this sacrifice to have more range in that joint. He's got a bicep swivel so that spins 360, double hinge at the elbows for quite good range despite his chunky armor, swivel hinge at the wrist for 360 spin, and articulating inwards as well as outwards for those repulsor blasts. He's got a mid-torso ball joint so you can spin him 360 as well as getting just a little bit of sideways tilting going on. His forward range is very limited, so that's a bit of a disappointment. However, he does get quite good backward bend. He's got ball-socketed hip joints that go out quite a good bit for a man in armor. No problems forward and backward as well. The thigh swivel is quite well disguised by that frontal armor plate, and that means you can spin his leg outwards as well as inwards. Double jointed pinless knees, so that's good range, kicking quite far back. He's got a boot swivel just at his calf, and that's quite well disguised. Quite good range of ankle tilting upwards as well as downwards, and also generous kind of detented ankle pivot outwards as well as inwards. He's got pretty decent articulation and a very good range in his backward bend, as well as his neck articulation means that you can get him into a really convincing and very cool flight pose, especially when you combine other blast effects from Iron Man. The great thing about this figure is that it's also backward compatible with a couple of unhelmeted Tony Stark hits. The classic one might sit a little high, but it's also fudgeable. While the Gameverse one looks a little small, I like how it accentuates the bulky aesthetic of this armor. So right now I'm gonna try to modify his torso to get more forward bend out of it. We're gonna first have to bend it all the way back as far as possible, and then we're gonna mark out over here a line that we do not want to grind away any plastic beyond. This means that we won't be disrupting any of that sculpt when he's bent backwards the most for his flight poses. So I heated up the upper torso with a hairdryer and popped it off. Now we can have a better look at the ball joint. You can see that there are a couple of strengthening ribs on the inside of the lower torso, and these ribs are actually getting in the way of getting more forward range in that ball joint. As you can see over here, it just simply interferes with that joint. And now we have a look at that marking that I made earlier, just to make sure that we don't grind beyond that point. So grinding off this much plastic over here and some parts of the ribs would definitely give this figure much more forward range. Over the course of modifying the figure to get a larger range of motion from that ab crunch, I realized that I would also need to remove a little bit of material from this portion of the upper torso, just to make sure that this socket wouldn't interfere with the ab crunch joint. So this is what the lower torso looks like after removing a lot of material from those strengthening ribs, as well as quite a bit of plastic from that lower torso piece. The key thing is to also remove some material down the front of that ball joint to give this peg a lot more forward range. And this is also what the upper torso looks like after removing a little bit of material from that front portion of that tube that goes and connects to that peg on the lower torso. I use a rotary grinding tool to remove this, or a Dremel would work just fine. Just make sure to wear eye protection when you're using the tools and stay safe. And fitting the upper torso back onto the lower torso and checking out the range of forward ab crunch, and he's definitely got an improvement. The increased range of the forward ab crunch exposes a little bit of gap from the back, but usually when you have the figure in a forward ab crunch, you're not going to look at him from the back. And also testing the backward crunch range, and you don't actually see any disruption of the sculpt despite removing quite a bit of material on the front of that lower torso. And that means you can definitely get him into those flying poses once more without having to worry about exposing any of the gaps from the front. And of course, having better forward ab crunch means you can get him into more dramatic action poses. My next modification would be to add panel lining to the action figure, and that would accentuate the tech detail and highlight the lines that are really well sculpted on this figure, adding contrast and bringing out those details better. I would use a fine Gundam panel marker, and this would be in black color. All you need to do is just follow the lines on the figure and color in the black ink. I much prefer panel lining because this is neater than adding a black wash to the figure. A black wash would be much faster, however I do not like that the black wash would sometimes stain the rest of the armor and kind of remove that luster of the metallic red plastic. Okay, so this is what it looks like half done. I have done the panel lining just on the left side of the figure. I quite like how the panel lining brings out all the detailing and accentuates all that fine sculpting work on this figure. To my eye at least, it looks more eye-catching and even brings out all of that good sculpting work on the back of the figure as well. And panning down to his legs as well, those lines now stand out a lot more compared to the right side of the figure or its original state. The line on the gold parts of the armor also helps to break up all that monotony. So here is Iron Man all lined up, and you can see that he's completed, and I quite like the final look and effect of the panel lining. It brings out all the detail, and I think that it makes the reds and the yellow golds just really pop. Zooming in just to see all that detail up close, all that sculpting and great work is already there. It just needed a little something just to bring it more out. I'm definitely much happier with the way it looks now, but I can also understand that lining a figure isn't for everyone, and the dark and very obvious lines might be too stark for some people. This Iron Man stands at a good height of 6.5 inches, and that's about 16.5 centimeters. Stacking him up once more with the other Iron Man, and I quite like that he's got a more vibrant palette, and the black panel lining helps the bright plastic from looking cheap. Here he is with Cap and Black Widow. He's appropriately smaller than Thor and Hulk. And here's Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. Stacking up against some baddies, here he is with Doctor Doom and Ultron. And here he is with MODOK and Thanos. Here he is with G.I. Joe Classified Series and Star Wars Black Series. I groaned when I first saw the previews of this figure, cause not another Iron Man again, but having this in hand, I have changed my mind. It's got plenty of great sculpting work, but really needs the panel lining in my opinion to bring out the contrast and prevent the bright plastics from looking cheap. The figure feels good to handle and pose and would also benefit from the torso mod. I can safely say with these couple of modifications, you would definitely enjoy this figure in hand. Please like and share this video, let me know what you think in the comments below, and subscribe to my channel for more toy reviews. Thanks for watching, take care and stay safe.